In a world where crowns glitter and banners rise, love sometimes slips between the creases of duty and a crowded schedule. It comes not loud and sudden, but like a quiet dawn, a thread that tugs you back to what matters. Tonight, we tell 5 stories of royal couples who found each other not in grand gestures, ordinary hours when life asks for patience, trust, and stubborn hope. So lean in and let their devotion remind you that even a throne can be softened by the warmth of a true heart. Victoria and Albert walked as if their footsteps could rewrite history. Not with fireworks but with daily habits. In the palace corridors, in the noise of Parliament, they learned to listen. Victoria, with her journal of simple questions, and Albert, with his quiet, stubborn belief that reform begins at home. They shared letters stacked like tiny bridges across long distances. And in those notes lay a map of a partnership built on partnership first. They learned to weather illness, mourning, the steady drum of public opinion. And still they carved out pockets of joy, a shared library of ideas, a garden where patience grew. A promise to protect each other's soul even when the world pressed in. When Albert spoke, his voice carried the echo of a future they would shape together, step by step. Through seasons of PTA meetings and political storms. Through the small rituals that kept love from becoming a distant memory. And Victoria, steadfast as a lighthouse, kept faith that their shared dream could outlast every controversy. Their love wasn't a spark that burned bright and left. It was a flame that learned to glow through fog, to endure, to guide. Cleopatra and Antony met amid tides of power and poetry. Their faces turned toward a horizon that demanded sacrifice. The Nile whispered their names. And the sea seemed to hold its breath when they spoke of a life threaded through with loyalty more than convenience. They learned the costs of ambition, Roman legions, embassies, and the murmurs of courtiers who measured romance as a strategic move. Yet in the shared quiet of night, away from the glare of the throne, they discovered a truth that outlasted battles. They could choose each other again and again, even when the world urged them apart. Their love was not merely passion. It was a pact to endure the loneliness, the misunderstandings, and the temptations of power. Antony's resolved to return to Cleopatra's door after every gambit. Cleopatra's forgiveness after every misstep. Spoke of a romance that grew in the soil of imperfect hours, weathered storms. And the stubborn belief that love, when tended with honesty, can outlive every siege. Napoleon and Josephine carried a gentleness in their letters, as if the ink itself learned to soften the edges of empire. They lived not in a single moment of triumph but in the long stretch between victories and defeats. Distance made their hearts ache, time, with its cruel gravity, could have learned them apart. But they chose to fill those gaps with words that mattered, confessions, memories, small jokes that only lovers share. Josephine's resilience became Napoleon's shelter and compass, Napoleon's ambition, a force she tempered with grace and humor. They learned to forgive, to rebuild, to trust again after every rumor, every exile, every fear of losing each other to the noise of a crowd. Their love became a quiet revolution. Quiet because it moved not in marching drums but in the patient, daily decision to show up for one another. The empire could rise and fall, but in the spaces between battles, their vow remained: to love with an honesty that refused to shrink. Eleanor of Aquitaine and Henry II held a courtship of roads and rivers, a marriage that stretched across kingdoms and the long chapters of history. They navigated sacred vows and shared power with a rare courage, the courage to be seen, to be vulnerable, and to choose one another again after disputes that could have torn a realm apart. They rode together through the shock of marriage, the exile to the borderlands, and the politics that pressed on every seam of their union. Their love survived not by avoiding conflict, but by an unspoken agreement to keep speaking, to return to the table, to listen when the other spoke of duty and desire in the same breath. They taught their children and the world that tenderness can be a strategy, not a weakness, that a partnership when built on respect and stubborn faith, can endure the strangest storms and still offer a path back to home. Suleiman the Magnificent and Hürrem Sultan turned the pages of a history book that had long ignored the soft textures of affection. Their years together were not a single blaze but a continuous glow, years of strategic minds and generous hearts, of political wit paired with private tenderness. Hürrem's rise by his side did not erase her humanity, it highlighted it, shaping a relationship where both partners grew into each other's strengths. They learned to balance the demands of a vast empire with the needs of a partner who deserved to be seen, heard, and cherished. Their everyday acts shared meals in a palace that hummed with guests, letters that traveled across borders. The quiet companionship in a moment before sleep became the architecture of a love that could soften even the hardest corners of power. What makes their story enduring is not a single act of triumph, but the daily choice to respect one another's mind and heart, to trust in a future that they would build together, stone by stone. The common thread through these 5 tales is not just romance but resilience. Each couple faced duties that demanded everything they could give and then gave more time, more patience, more grace. They discovered that love does not always meet you in fireworks. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet corner of a crowded room, the glance across a breakfast table, the letter you read at night when the palace falls silent. And in those small, almost invisible moments, they found what many search for all their lives: a partner who sees you as you are, with all your flaws and radiance, and chooses you, again and again, in a world that never stops asking for more. If you're listening and hoping for a sign that love can endure the pressure of a busy life, take a breath with these stories. Let the patience of Victoria, the courage of Cleopatra, the steadfast devotion of Napoleon and Josephine, the alliance of Eleanor and Henry, and the strategic tenderness of Suleiman and Hürrem remind you that romance isn't only a moment of heat. It's a practice, a decision to stay, to listen, to grow, and to believe in a future that you build together. In every era, on every throne, love survives when 2 people choose to keep showing up. So here's to the couples who kept faith in the quiet hours, who found each other again after disappointments, and who learned that a happily ever after is not a sudden ending but a lifetime of slowly turning toward one another, day after day, through all of life's seasons. If you've lingered here for their whispers, you're not alone. There is a tenderness that lingers after the last page is closed, a reminder that love's work continues in ordinary hours. These next lines aren't about grand entrances but about the quiet rituals that hold a life together. The morning quiet when 2 cups steam, the letters saved for a rainy afternoon, the apology spoken softly after a long day. In the stories above, patience wasn't passive. It was a decision to stay curious about the other person, to listen for what wasn't said, to tend the garden of small. Victoria learned that reforms are rooted in home, and Albert learned that a nation begins with trust between 2 people. Cleopatra and Antony showed that even a throne can bow to loyalty, again and again. Napoleon and Josephine proved that love can reweave a life after loss, not by erasing the past but by carrying it together. Eleanor and Henry reminded us that power loses its sting when chosen with tenderness. Suleiman and Hürrem reveal how a shared purpose can outshine the lure of prestige. If you've ever waited for a letter, a call, a sign that someone chose you today, these stories are for you. They invite you to believe that romance isn't a finished painting but a living portrait, painted day by day with patience, humor, and truth. So take a breath, and let hope settle into your chest. Your own love story might be waiting just behind a routine, a conversation, a compromise. And if these old kings and queens can rediscover their way back to each other, perhaps you can too. Share the warmth with a friend who could use a reminder that a real happily ever after is built, not bought. Until next time, may your days be steadier, your questions softer, and your heart open to the quiet miracle